Welcome to Everything Comes Together. My name is Srinag and I'm an architectural photographer based in Chennai, India. My first guest today is Vikram Chandrasekhar, a concert photographer. On Everything Comes Together, I'll be speaking with people in the broader photography, architecture, and design communities. Rather than only talking about their work, we will be talking about them, their personal journey, the challenges they overcame, and the most pivotal incidents in their lives that made them who they are today. So now, let's get to it. There are highly specialized niches in photography, and then there is concert photography. My next guest has one of the most incredible backstories built on hard times, sheer grit, and a relentless ability to make his own luck. Vikram Chandrasekhar is a concert photographer who has photographed some of the biggest bands and performers in the world like Slash, ZZ Top, and A.R. Rahman, but is one of the most accessible people around. He was incredibly candid, and even though I've known him for years, I was surprised by where the conversation went.
I broadly do three different things. One is the concert photography in itself. I do a bit of video work as well. I travel with bands. I work for music festivals around the world. I build content for them. The other thing that I do is I run a small content production unit where we do photography, we do video work, and we help brands put together podcasts and things like that. The third thing I do is that I host and produce a podcast where I talk to musicians and artists and stuff like that. So broadly, these are the things that I do. So there's the photography and video that I do for bands and festivals. There's the content production that I do. Again, a combination of different kinds of brands, some musicians, and the podcast that I host as well. So those are the three things that I do.
So it looks like you do a wide variety of things related to photography and a lot of work on the creative side. And little later on in the show, we'll come back to talking about concert photography and how how your work actually goes ahead on a day-to-day basis. But let's just start with talking about your background and how you actually got interested in photography in general and concert photography particularly.
So my interest in photography was a result of my interest in music, and that's kind of how it started. So my parents listened to a lot of music. They had a huge record collection back in the day. My father was also very interested in poetry, and they listened to they had a very eclectic taste in music. So my father would listen to a lot of Western music and Tamil music. My mother listened to a lot of Western music and Hindi music. So that's really where my interest in music started. And then I took up the guitar quite early on. I think I was in my 8th or 9th standard when I started playing the guitar. I used to play the mridangam. I think when I was a couple of years old, I started playing the mridangam. Played for a few years, gave it up, and then started playing guitar.
I did not know about the mridangam.
Yes, so that was when that was my earliest interest in music, and then the guitar came about, and that's kind of how it started. So my interest in music started there, and later on it kind of branched out into an interest in photography. My dad always had cameras and was quite interested in photography itself. So much later on, I got interested in photography, but the interest in music was always there.
And was this something that did you ever think that you might get into photography? Or into music for that matter?
I always wanted to be on stage. So that was how it kind of started. And a combination of, some weird stage fear and just maybe, feeling that I was not good enough as a guitar player. So the interest to be on stage was always there. And then I remember a lot of the albums that I used to look at in the early days, whether it was cassettes or the vinyl, I was very inspired by a lot of the album art. And it was many years, later that I decided to. There was a local rock band that was coming to Chennai, and I had a camera lying around, and I wanted to attend the show, and I thought, why not go and take a few pictures? And that's kind of how it started. My interest in music photography started. That was really the first time I picked up a camera and went to a concert.
So let's go a little bit further back. Where did you study here in Chennai?
I studied in a school in Chennai, a school called Sishya. I was there for most of my life. And then I went to a boarding school. I had a reasonably difficult time through school. Went to boarding school, came back, went to another school where I just couldn't fit in. And then, I took a break at the end of my finished school, and then I took a break. I decided to go and work, which is kind of unheard of then, because I was not sure what I wanted to do, and I said, what, let me just go and get a job. And I wanted to be financially independent from very early on. So I got a job. I was selling. I got a job in a courier company to sell courier services. So it was like a sales exec job. So that was my first job. So I, finished up with school, took a break, went and worked, and then kind of studied a little bit after that, and then went back to work. So,
did you? What was the main profession in the family, or was there something like that? Did people expect you to move in a different direction from where you actually went?
I think somewhere my father did. My father comes from a family of doctors. He was a doctor himself. My grandmother is a doctor. My grand aunt is a doctor. My mother has been a special educator for most of her life. So I think somewhere there was the expectation maybe to do something that was more academic in nature. So I think yes, definitely that expectation was there, at least from my dad. But it just didn't work for me. So
yeah, that's where we get into photography.
Yeah, it was music. It was always music. I mean, like most good, Indians or people from Chennai. I was also playing cricket fairly seriously, and then I played a decent level of cricket, and then I got dropped. So it was either that or it was music. And from music, eventually came photography.
So getting back to the job you took after school, you took a year off after school and then worked at this courier company. And that actually started a long string of varied jobs that you took up, right?
Correct, absolutely. So my first job was in sales. I liked the freedom that sales had to offer. I would get to, at that point, go all around the city. I was meeting new people. I was making friends. So that was something I really enjoyed. And that is something that's kind of stayed with me through my life. So it was sales. Then I moved to a slightly bigger courier company. I then got into selling computer hardware. So it's always been a combination of sales, client servicing, some part marketing. That's what I've always done. Interacted with people, met new people, made connections. That's been a constant through my life. So it started out with a courier company, then went on to selling computer hardware, then I was selling computer software for a while before I think it was the late 90s that I eventually ended up in what was then called a multimedia company. I was in client servicing. And that's kind of how I ended up in this whole digital space.
While you've been working at these jobs was probably also when you went to college.
Correct, yes. I completed my degree alongside, doing these varied jobs, yeah.
And what did you study?
I studied economics.
Oh, okay. So that's another variation from sales and marketing
Absolutely.
and getting into the soft.
Yeah, I had to do something, so I ended up doing that. But I've always wanted to kind of find my own way around it. I just, I remember thinking, one was, wanting freedom, and two, I think somewhere quite early on in the piece, I discovered that, I can't, I, I don't think I was cut out to work for someone. I don't think I was cut out to do the 9 to 5 working for someone.
So, what, apart from not being cut out to be a part of a 9 to 5 job, what would you think are the takeaways from 5 jobs and a difficult time in school and college? That's a pretty strong learning that you must have gained from that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, like I said, looking back today, I think I did the right thing, right? So I followed my instinct. I kind of went out there. I wanted to be financially independent, and that has taught me a lot. That whole experience of working from quite early on, and I think I knew those were my strengths. My strengths were always networking, communicating with people, and something I enjoyed was going out there and meeting people. Um, so I think that kind of helped me figure. I connected the dots much later on, but I kind of figured that those were my strengths, and it's really helped me later on in life.
Yeah, it's good to identify your strengths pretty early on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at this point, after working 5 jobs, now you were, I think, ready to step out on your own.
Correct. So I think I was employed till 2000, 2006, 2007 maybe. So I did a couple of stints at two interactive agencies, working client servicing jobs with both. And I think it was 2006, 2007 that I had one big client, and I had enough of working for people. And I decided to get out on my own. I started a small freelance unit then. We did pretty well. We had clients, we did work around the world.
And what was it called?
It was called the Scribble Pad. It was a small freelance outfit. We started out building websites and doing basically some social media work back then. So I was doing that till about 2000. I think it was 2013 or 14. At which point I was also into fitness and health and all of that. I think it was then that they came to me as clients and it was a health nutrition startup, a food startup. They were doing juices and salads and stuff like that. It really appealed to me, so I kind of put whatever I was doing on hold and decided to do a startup. So we did a nutrition startup, ran it for a few years.
And this was Relish.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I remember actually ordering some of those smoothies and drinks and trying it out.
Yeah, we were making that cold pressed juice and smoothie.
Yes, I remember those. Yeah.
So I did that for a few years. Again, I was managing sales and doing a bit of marketing and branding and stuff like that there. When that went under, along the way between doing Relish and while I was still freelancing, that was when I started concept photography. So when Relish, when we eventually shut Relish, or when I left Relish rather, it was a particularly low point. I think I must have been about almost 40 at that point. And I was not sure where I wanted to go. So went back, said, what, concept photography is my thing. It had given me a lot of happiness, doing it over the few years that I did it. It was always a second gig, and but it gave me a lot of pleasure, a lot of happiness. So I decided to jump into it, about 6-7 years ago, and it's been fabulous ever since.
It really has. So this also comes back to your passion for music and being exposed to photography, you were able to put that together, and that's the sort of job that I think everyone wants to have, something that puts their passions together. But was it an easy entry? Was it hard? It's not a very common field to get into.
Yeah, it's not a very common field, and also because I had no background in photography. So going back to it must have been 2010 when I first went to a concert, camera in hand, and I remember there was an Indian rock band from Delhi called Parikrama that was playing in, and I was a big fan of their music. So went on Facebook, looked up. I knew Subir was the guy who ran the band, so to speak. I wrote to Subir and I said, look, I'd like to come and shoot this concert, but I have nothing to show. I don't have a single picture to show for it. But give me a shot. So he did. He wrote back. He was very nice, and he wrote back and he said, "Sure, yeah, you can come." And he said, "Just share the pictures with us." I said, "Yeah, absolutely."
This was just a cold call out of the blue.
Completely out of the blue. So it took a lot at that point. I'm like, I'm not particularly young. I don't know. Will this lead to anything? But I think the overarching thing was I really loved the music and I wanted to be in that environment. And I said, what? Let me see if I can go and make some pictures. So I went there. I was very overwhelmed because there were lots of people, and then I had access to the stage. I had no clue what to do with that access, where to go, what, how, and I made a ton of mistakes. I don't think I got any usable pictures, or maybe there was one or two just by chance. I got one or two usable pictures, but Subir was really nice about it. I sent him the pictures, and I'm like, he's going to really give me a mouthful saying he wasted giving someone this opportunity, but he was really nice about it. Again, taught me a lot. He was very appreciative. He thanked me and he said, "I'll use the pictures." I don't think he ever did, but that's kind of how that was the first time I ever shot a concert.
And I think that's also really generous of someone who is already well established to get an email from someone he doesn't know, who doesn't have the experience, give them a break, to just come in and take some pictures, and then is encouraging even after it doesn't work out the way you planned.
Which is fantastic. I mean, to this day, I've said it many times over the years that Subir is was really encouraging. I mean, he could have really broken my spirit back then if he had said, "This is absolute shit. I don't want to use these images," but he was really nice about it. So that was kind of my first foray into concert photography. I spent a few years after shooting small clubs, gigs here. Again, didn't know anything. I remember, I can't remember which show it was, but I rented a camera and I had no clue what to do with it. I think it was a Nikon something. I had no clue what to do with it, and I was. I remember reading up on YouTube and stuff, and reading up on the internet and stuff like that. But made a complete hash of many of those early shows, but stuck with it. And many years later, I guess here I am. So that was kind of the early entry into concert photography.
So after your first shoot at the Parikrama concert, you must have found a few technical challenges that you needed to overcome.
So my technical challenges, I think,
what were those like?
Most concerts happen in the evening at night, or outdoor concerts, or even if it's at a bar, for example, it's very low light, and most of you have people jumping around and all of that. So trying to figure out how to freeze motion, for example, how to shoot in low light. You can't use flash, you can't use any external source of light. So those were really challenging, right? To get usable images, most shows that happen, like I said, whether it's in bars or clubs or wherever it is in the evening and at night. And that was a big challenge. I think that by far was my biggest challenge. How to figure out how to shoot in low light without any external light, to figure out how to shoot people who are jumping around, all kinds of stuff. So those were my biggest challenges.
And was there any chance for you to learn from someone?
I wrote to a few people. You know, I don't even think they wrote back. I wrote to a couple of others. They said no. So there was really no opportunity. I didn't know anybody who was. I think there was one person in Chennai who was shooting some concerts, but I didn't know anybody else who was doing concert photography. I had a couple of friends. I picked their brains occasionally, but no. Most of it is just learned on the job. Most of it is learned on the internet. Yeah, that's pretty much how I've kind of learned and found my way around this.
And let me just ask you something as an aside from this.
Sure.
Now, you've been shooting concerts for about 6 or 7 years, right? So in the early days, I assume you would have been concentrating a lot more on making sure your shot was just right, because you were still gaining experience on shooting in challenging conditions. But now that you've spent some time there and you must be completely familiar with all your equipment and the really crazy conditions that we'll talk about later on, can you still enjoy the concert as an attendee while you're shooting?
Yes, I still do. There are times, in fact, that I've gotten carried away. I'm singing with the band, and then I kind of lose sight of the fact that I've got a job to do, and we have very little time. So yeah, so what I do now is I go out there. I know what kind of pictures I need to get. I research the band a fair bit before I go and shoot them. I watch, whether it's YouTube videos, I watch other photographers, what kind of pictures other photographers have taken. Just get to understand the band a bit more. So I go in there, I finish. We are given mostly only 1 or 2 songs, and if we're really lucky, we're given 3 songs. So I finish that, and then if we are not escorted out of the venue, then I get to sit around and enjoy the concert after. But I still do. Yeah, like I said earlier, it's the environment that I'm in that I really enjoy. Being amidst all that chaos and madness and the pyrotechnics and all of that, that is something I really enjoy. So it's the experience for sure.
Okay. So now getting back to your story, at this point, you get a major break, which is the NH7.
Correct. So I was at the NH7 Weekend Music Festival in Bangalore, and I went there. I didn't have any kind of access. I was not shooting for a publication or a band or anything like that. So I went there, and most of my pictures I was shooting from the crowd. And I remember at one point, I think Raghu Dixit was playing and it was drizzling, and I decided to said, okay, before it really comes down, let me get a few pictures. So I took a few pictures of Raghu Dixit and the band from the crowd, and then the rain came down. I went back. I was, I think it was maybe about 9:30 by then, managed to trek through all the mud and the water and the sludge, and I got to the bus. So there was a bus that would take us from the venue to, I think it was like a bus stop or something, or somewhere in the city. And I remember I was sitting there and I was really bummed because it was tough, and I was shooting from the crowd and just thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing, when there was a kid on the bus. I think he was one of the volunteers at the festival. He came up to me, started talking to me, and he said, you know what, why don't you send your pictures to this magazine? So there was a Bangalore-based magazine called What's the Scene. He said, send them your pictures, and you never know. So I sent them my pictures. I wrote it down, and this was a completely chance interaction. Right? I'll talk about luck a little later, and you'll see why I'm talking about the story there. So this guy came to me and he said, write to this magazine. So I wrote to them. Went back to my aunt's house that night, and the next morning I wrote to them. I sent them some pictures, and they said, sure, you can you can shoot for us, and we'll get you access, and you tell us what shows you'd like to shoot, and we'll get you access to those shows. And that's really how it started.
And that's pretty amazing that someone you just met by chance, someone who just
Absolutely.
saw you don't even know who this guy is.
Absolutely, and that's kind of been a thing right through my years of being a concert photographer. Right, I've had people that I've really had no reason to meet. I've had them show up, and I've met them, and it's kind of led to something. That's been a constant. So that happened, and I started shooting for this magazine. I also, I met a band. I made friends with a band. There is a band called Thaikudam Bridge, who became, good friends of mine. Another band that gave me an opportunity to come to all their shows to shoot. They gave me a lot of access. Again, for someone without a track record, I think, to give somebody an opportunity was absolutely fabulous. And today, they've become good friends of mine. So I did a fair amount of, work for them as well. Shot a lot of pictures for them. And so, that's how.
And I think something that you had mentioned to me earlier was the photo from that NH7 concert of Raghu Dixit that actually was.
Yeah. So I put up those pictures on my Facebook. So I created a Facebook page, and I was very very reticent to tell anybody that I was even doing concert photography, because again, being underconfident, and there are all these jokes about how everybody becomes a photographer or a yoga teacher these days. It's always been that's been the joke, right? So I was always very hesitant to tell people this is what I do. But anyway, I put up these pictures, and then I sent one of it to I think the band's Facebook page, and Raghu changed his profile picture to the one I shot, and I was pleasantly surprised. And that was really, I think, that gave me a lot of confidence that wow, that there is something there, and and that's kind of how, again, I've managed to build more confidence and basically take it to the next step. So.
And what was the next step from here?
So I went to. So I had shot in Bangalore. I had shot in Chennai, and I had quite early on in the piece, I put together a website, which was, I think, a good thing that I did, and I sent it out to people. I sent it out to. I was always writing to bands, and back then they wouldn't even look at me. Right? But I would send it out to some organizers in India, and occasionally I'd get a response. So that was really encouraging, right? That people actually took the time to write. They'd look at it and either say, it doesn't work for us, or it's nice, come and work for us. So I was in, I had shot for a few years, and then I was in Bombay to shoot the Mahindra Blues Festival. They already had a photographer, but I basically said, look, give me one chance, you won't regret it. And I sent them my work, and I went to Bombay. I managed to get, so there was a band headlining one of the nights called Supersonic Blues Machine that had Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top was also playing. Again, I got access.
That's impressive.
Went back to doing what I do best, which is make friends with the band. And I introduced myself. I said, look, I'm going to be shooting this show, and I'd like to share some pictures with you. I was fortunate enough to meet Billy as well. I shot the show. I did some portraits with some of the band. The bass player of the band, this guy called Fabrizio Grossi. So Fabrizio introduced himself to me after the show, and he said, look, why don't you send me some pictures? So I sent Fab some of the pictures that I had shot, and he really liked the pictures. And, he invited me out onto the road with a band the following year in the UK. They were playing a big festival in the UK. They were doing an album launch as well. So he invited me out to come to the UK. So that was a big step. That was really, I think that was my first big international break.
And I think this is where I think we can start to talk about what you actually learned through this journey, because you seem to have established yourself at some level, and at the next stage you actually start to shoot for one of the biggest names in Indian music, which is A.R. Rahman. How did that come about?
So I was sitting, I think it was the brew room, or I was sitting there one day, and you know, a friend of mine again who's with who's with a band said, you know, why don't you send your work to Mr. Rahman? He's doing a lot of live uh, concerts. Why don't you send your work and see what happens? And I remember telling him, there's no way they'd even look at me. So I sent it to him. I got his email ID and I sent it to him. I sent him 3 lines saying, this is who I am. I've done some work internationally. I've done some work in Bombay, and these are the list of people that I've worked for.
How did you manage to get Rahman's email address?
Well, this person who had already done some work for him, so he knew him, and he said, "There's a good chance you won't get a response, but write to him and see." So I wrote to him, and the next day I got a call from his production company in Bombay, and they said, "Can you come and meet us?" I was doing the NH7 Weekender in Pune that weekend. So I went to Pune and then I went to Bombay after. And I met with them and they said, can you come and shoot? He was playing in Vizag, I think. Can you come and shoot that show? And it was like nothing I had experienced before, right? Just the scale of the production. I think there was apparently about 4.5 lakh people at that show.
That is huge.
Yeah. So they said you can come and we'll give you a chance, and we'll see how it is, if we like to work with you, if you like to work with us, and all of that. And they were great people to work with, absolutely fabulous experience, taught me a lot. So I did a few shows with them as well. But yeah, it was an absolutely incredible experience. Completely different vibe to anything I had done before that. I mean, the biggest, I think, show I had done before that was in the UK with Supersonic, and that was maybe about 25,000 people at that show, right? But this was nothing like that. This was, I think, a couple of lakh people, and it's just so crowded, and there's so many people on stage, so it was a completely different experience.
And security must have been off the charts.
Oh yes, absolutely. So I remember I had to. He was doing a meet and greet, so I had to shoot the show, and then I had to wade through the crowd. So I was near the FOH, and I had to go from there. I had to wade through and go backstage, and I had like a police escort and all kinds of things, right? So and it was absolutely crazy.
And what's the FOH?
Yeah, which is where the mixing desk is, the front of house for the band, right?
Okay.
So which is basically, halfway into the crowd. So that's where I was.
So now that you've spent time shooting some pretty international bands, you've shot the biggest name in Indian music, what would you consider your takeaways from what you had done so far? By this time it was 2015, right?
Yeah, it was, actually no. When I shot for Mr. Rahman, I think it was 2016.
Okay. So what would be your takeaways from what you learned to start off? Because you really had to get yourself unstuck and you set yourself apart from just normal people who want to take pictures of bands.
Correct. So I think, very quickly on, I realized that, with concert photography, we are all, if there's 20 of us in a photo pit, all of us have the same camera equipment. In fact, a lot of them had much better equipment. They've been doing this a lot longer than I have, especially internationally. There's very little you can do to differentiate yourself when it comes to, you're shooting the same pictures of the same people. There's not much you can do. The only way to differentiate yourself is to get better access, right? And better, because obviously then you get a lot more you can shoot, whether it's backstage, whether it's sound check and all of that. And that comes from knowing people. That comes from the ability to network. And it's just all about who you know. So early on, I think my takeaways, I think the things I did right were, I had a website very early on. I managed to put together some work. I curated some work that I thought I could send out to people. I figured out a format with which I could write to people and tell them what I could do for them more than just saying, hey, I want to come and shoot. So those were my takeaways. But really, the biggest thing that I learned was just networking, being an easy person to work with. And that really is the differentiator in a sense, right? It's the level of access you get. So I think those were my big takeaways.
And the work ethic really makes a difference when working with international companies or international bands where they expect a different level of professionalism.
Correct. So that, again, when it was 2017 when I first shot abroad, 2016, 2017, I can't remember. But it was only then that I realized how, the kind of equipment you'll need to turn images around. So we're given, for example, 3 songs to shoot. And a lot of the photographers I found would shoot half a song, one song, and would run to the media tent and would, start uploading their images. And those images would go on social media. And then it's basically, first mover advantage in a sense, right? For which you'll need almost like a portable office. You'll need a portable drive. You'll need a decent laptop. You'll need to figure out how to get those images off the camera. All of that stuff. So I found that was a big step, and I had just jumped in. I didn't have a chance to do this gradually and learn and make mistakes and learn. I was shooting for a band, and I decided to jump into it. And thankfully, it worked out. Right? There were things that went wrong, of course, but thankfully, it worked out. So very early on, I learned from an equipment standpoint, just from a work ethic standpoint, also, right? Whether it's turning in paperwork, a lot of the bands need, you need to sign releases for a lot of the bands. Those need to be turned in on time, rain or shine. There was an incident I remember when the first year I was shooting in the UK. I was going to shoot, the bass player of Iron Maiden has another project, and I'm a huge fan of theirs. I was going to shoot that band. I got access, and then they told me they needed me to turn in some paperwork at 2:30, and it was raining. And I went to the media tent at I think 2:45, and they turned me away. They said, "No, you said 2:30," and then I had to, I begged and pleaded, and I got off with a stern warning. They gave me access, but got off with a stern warning. So very early on, I learned that. I had to change the way that I worked. And, after having worked for so long in India, there's a certain attitude that won't fly in the West. So.
The way I would see it is that the biggest takeaway from what you do from the outside and as another photographer is being able to put yourself out there, not being afraid to call people and not being afraid of rejection.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
Where does that come from? Where did you even pick up on having this kind of a mentality of just going after what you want?
So I think, if you look at it early on, like I said, my early work days, right, when I was selling courier services. So I remember at that point, it was, I think, 2 or 3 rupees for, the value of a local courier was 2 or 3 rupees. And I had to go, I remember I would go to all these rice merchants in North Madras trying to ask them if they have anything to send via courier that day, right? You'd constantly get rejected, constantly. So very early on, I learned that, it's all right to get rejected, but the problem is if you don't ask, right? And so, like they say, I mean, if you ask, you never know what you'll get if you ask. So to this day, I'm not afraid of, I'm not worried about getting rejected. I get rejected a lot. To this day, I continue to get rejected. But it's something I just do. So I think that's really where it started, right? And early on, the need to have a certain sense of freedom, right? And I would do anything to kind of to get that freedom and to have that sense of freedom. And I think that's why I do what I do even today, right? And I think that's really where the not being afraid of rejection comes from.
So Vikram, early on, In the show, you talked about all the various work that you do, and now we've also walked through your journey into concert photography. But most people, I don't think, even know what really happens at a concert, or what happens backstage, and what are the conditions that you're shooting in. Because from what you have told me, it sounds pretty treacherous. Why don't you just expand a little bit on what you actually go through on a concert shoot?
So I think depending on where you're looking at it from, it can be quite treacherous. So yeah, so like I said earlier, right? We are typically given when you shoot a concert. So whether it's a festival, unless you're with the band, and I've been with a couple of bands. In that case, you sometimes get to shoot their whole set. Otherwise, it's 3 songs. You have a small area called the photo pit. So there is the crowd, there is the barricade, then there are all the security in front of the barricade. On this side, there's the stage, there's speakers, there's pyrotechnics. So you're basically between the security guys and the stage. And at any given point, so if you take a big festival abroad, there's about 350 photographers from around the world. Right, and each of us might get one song, right? So we're sent into that pit in batches of 60 or 70 people, and we're all basically jostling for space. Again, you have no control over the lighting. You have no control. I mean, you pretty much have no control. I've had instances where there are people who crowd surf and then pretty much get thrown over the security guys. People will land on you sometimes. Then there's all the fire and the pyrotechnics going off, and you get like 60 seconds to make a shot. There's also the weather. A lot of the time in like where I shoot in Germany, it rains a lot. So there's all of that you have to deal with. And then a lot of these festivals have 7 or 8 different stages. And, if you're shooting for a publication, typically you'll need to do so many big bands, you'll need to do so many small bands. So it involves going from stage to stage, 2 cameras in hand, trying to shoot as much as you can. And then, you have to go to the media tent, upload a lot of those images, because a lot of these guys want to put out these images first. There's the kind of, mad rush to put out images first. So there's the weather, there's the fact that you can't, again, lighting is something you have absolutely no control over. I've shot shows where it's just complete darkness, right? You can't get pictures. Or there are shows where the band stands so far back, they just don't want to come up in front of the stage because they know there are all these photographers. Some of them are not very photographer friendly. So there's all of this chaos. I mean, that, apart from, what happens before, you even get there, which is getting your visa, going all the way from India to a lot of these places are really far-flung, involve multiple connections, typically bus, train. There's all of that. We end up shooting, a lot of these festivals are, 16, 17 hour a day shoots. There's not much, you have to wade through the crowd and go to get food and stuff like that. So that is another problem. I typically carry protein bars.
So once you get to the venue, I assume you have kit, you have equipment that is not standard to most photographers, right?
Well, typically what I carry 2 bodies, I carry 4 lenses, I carry a monopod. I don't really carry a tripod. I carry a monopod and maybe a couple of pocket triggers. I carry gloves. I carry basically stuff to keep me warm. During the shoot, I have, again, typically 2 camera bags. I have a trolley that carries most of my big camera equipment and stuff that I can run around with from stage to stage. So that's, and a laptop and a hard drive and all of that. So there's a fair bit of equipment that you end up carrying. Extra batteries, tons of extra batteries. A lot of times you don't get opportunity to, like the media tent is full, you can't charge a battery, you can't do all of that stuff, right? So this is as far as shooting goes. The other big challenge is, going from, being from here, I'm not used to an outdoor life, as it were. I don't camp. I had never camped till 4 years ago, and in places like France where I was, I spent 3 nights, 4 nights actually in a plastic box, a cardboard box. So there was there wasn't enough room. I couldn't obviously get up, so I would lie down and basically crawl back out of that box. And I had 2 chairs outside, and I had my suitcase with a change of clothes and stuff on the chairs outside, and I would cover it because it would get damp at night. And then I would walk to this public bathroom and sometimes shower and sometimes not shower. So I spent 4 nights in a plastic box, in a cardboard box in a festival in France. In Germany, I camped out in someone's garden. So that was quite a funny story. So I camped out in this person's garden. We went out, we shot, came back like really late in the night. Must have been like 2 in the morning. It was raining and stuff like that. And I had set up my tent. I was going to go into my tent, and good sense prevailed. And I said, let me use my flashlight and just look inside the tent before I go. And I opened the tent and I turned on my flashlight. I saw the biggest hedgehog I'd ever seen.
Oh my God.
On my sleeping bag. And I was like, shit, how I can't, there's just no way, right? So then I called one of the other guys, and they've obviously been doing this a long time, right? He just went in, he picked up the hedgehog, walked away with it, and he went and I think he put it on the other side of the compound wall. He said, well, you can go in and sleep now. You'll be all right. I'm like, that was like totally crazy, right? So I never, so things like that. And then you can't sleep after that. You're always thinking like, something's going to come into my tent. So so there's all of these things, and then the food itself, right? So most of the times these festivals, I just end up eating like a hot dog, right? I'll have 1 or 2 hot dogs for the whole day. Getting water sometimes is a problem because most of them drink beer. I don't drink when I'm shooting. So getting water is a problem. So I remember a festival in Germany again one time where I luckily met this Indian gentleman who was running this food stall. And he was kind enough to give me a big bottle of water, which it was like liquid gold.
The things you need to stock upon and carry along with cameras is a water bottle.
Yeah, water bottle. I try and carry 2 water bottles actually. Because getting water is hard.
And you must wish that you'd be able to get your camera out of that melee of photographers pointing their cameras at the stage.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So there's also this this fear that your equipment will get damaged, right? I've had people. I think it was in England where somebody jumped over the barricade and basically decided he didn't like me for whatever reason. So I think he jumped the barricade and he shoved me. So I ended up falling on a bunch of photographers, equipment everywhere. All of that. I've had again people just jumping in slush and mud, and I'm kind of completely soaked in all of this crap, and then I have to sit and worry about my equipment. So there's
so how do you actually how is there any way that you're able to get a shot that's different from the other photographers that are in the same group with you, in the same pit with you?
So again, something I've learned from experience, right, is how well do you know the band? So typically there are certain musicians that have what they call signature moves. It could involve jumping off a speaker. It could involve, a certain way they played the guitar. It could involve something they did. So a lot of the time it's about how well do you know the band, and it's anticipating that moment when and the more you shoot, the more you listen to that music, you kind of know what to expect and what to anticipate. So there are times I've set myself up for that. I've gone out with the intention of shooting that one particular musician in one band, and there's just that one thing that he does that I want, right? And many times I've ended up getting that shot, and for some reason, it ends up being different many times from what other people, because in a small pit, there are only 1 or 2 vantage points you can get if you want a particular musician. And sometimes musicians if they are stage left, they're not all the time do they go stage right. So if you know that that is the moment that will define the band, or if there's fireworks in the beginning of the song, whatever it is. So there are times that I've actually not gone into the pit. I've gone, I've been in the crowd and shot from the crowd because I know there is this one moment that I want.
Yeah, so it also helps to plan based on each band that you shoot.
No, absolutely. A lot of research, a lot of planning, a lot of watching YouTube, a lot of looking at other musicians, other photographers who have shot this band. A lot of that. So that's again something that I do. I write to other photographers. If it's a new band, for example, and I like a particular shot, I try and find out if they actually jumped a certain way in the first 3 songs, if they did something, and is that how that photographer captured the moment, and just kind of make a note of it. So, if I ever run into the band, I know what to expect. So those are small things that I do.
Well, with a lot of the venues that you end up shooting are in different countries. So when you shoot in India, you know the language and generally know the culture. And when you shoot in the US or in England, that's Correct. A bit more similar. You have more exposure. What about how are your language skills, especially when you shoot in places like France and Germany?
Terrible. I don't speak the language, so I use Google Translate.
And that works well?
Yeah. You have to make it work, right? So a couple of funny things happened. I was in Paris, and I was trying to get to my venue, and so in the city, I bought a train ticket, and for some reason that ticket didn't swipe at the first turnstile at the station that I got in at. The ticket didn't swipe, but the guard, he let me through. He used his pass, and I think he let me through. Anyway, I think it was Gare du Nord. I got to the big station where I had to take a connection on to this small town called Clisson where I was shooting, and. So there are all these turnstiles, and my ticket wouldn't swipe. So I waited 5 minutes. I tried to swipe my ticket. There was absolutely no officer, no one inside. I mean, there was just people, but there was no official. So I had all of this equipment, and I'm like, I tried to swipe I spent about 5 minutes trying. I tried various turnstiles, didn't work. I was there for 55 minutes, and I would have missed my train, and I didn't know what to do. And again, I couldn't speak the language, and they thought I was just trying to panhandle, maybe brown guy in a station walking up with a ticket. And, I tried to tell people that it's not working. And then I went to a store and I said police, and they didn't understand police. And then I tried to do my Google Translate thing, which is basically say police in English, and Google will, tell me the French version of it. And I would ask them, and they didn't want to hold up my phone and listen to it as well, right? So I spent 55 minutes until I think he was Jamaican. He said, okay, I'll use my pass and let you through. So, but I almost missed my train. I was outside a venue in Paris when I was going to shoot the Scorpions, and I was looking for gate 35. There was gate 33 and there was gate 36, I think, or 34 and 36. There was no 35. So I went around the venue, I think multiple times. I would have spent an hour going around the venue asking for gate 35. They just didn't know. I was trying to say 35 in English, and they didn't know until one guard finally, he's like Google Translate. He agreed to listen to my phone, and, it said 35 in French. And I managed to kind of get in. I found the gate and I got it. So language is a big problem for me, especially in Europe.
And do you enjoy the amount of travel that you have to go through and, being alone for so much of the time?
There are times when it gets a little tiring, but, I really try. I work hard on my fitness. I try to keep myself physically fit. That helps. That really helps. But, there are times that it gets really hard. Just being on the road or, making all of these connections. Traveling 20 hours. I mean, this is excluding the travel from India, right? And for us, the stress starts even before. Last year, I was again shooting for a very big band, and my visa got rejected 4 days before I had to leave for France, or maybe a week before I had to leave for the UK. So I had to reapply, and I got my visa, I think, 2 days before I left. So all of that, that whole leading up to it can be quite stressful, but I've learned to cope. I've learned over the years, and I think also I count my blessings. I'm quite fortunate to do what I do. I had a moment in Germany, when it was raining. It just rains. It's, absolutely doesn't relent, and I was really, really tired, and wondering why I was doing what I was doing and just putting myself through this physical hardship. But I turned around. I looked at. I think there was about 3-4 lakh people at that show, and I was one of the few on this side of the barricade. So I was like, yeah, you're quite fortunate to be on this side of the barricades.
Yeah, you're somewhere where very, very few people ever get to go.
Yes, absolutely. And I think those are the things that also, keep me going during tough days, right? That you're really fortunate that you've gotten to do what you really like to do. And this is truly what I like to do. I think, like I was saying, going back to the Parikrama story, right? When they wanted that last shot with the band on stage and the audience in the background. And I stood there on the drum riser, and there was, I think maybe 1,000 people. And then that's when I really thought about it. And I was like, wow, this feels like something else. And this is really what I want to do. And I've been fortunate that I've got the chance to do it for, some of the biggest names in the music business.
So you've already touched upon the work ethic and the professionalism that really helps you get bigger and better gigs to shoot and to travel and work with international clients. When you're on the road, I assume you would need a lot of personal discipline as well, because it sounds like a pretty hard job, as satisfying as it may be. What are the sort of little tips that you have come up with for yourself to maintain yourself personally?
Yeah. So, quite early on, I learned a lot of the socializing, for example, a lot of the networking, whether it's with the artists or fellow photographers, before a show happens in a bar, right? For me, it's just a rule. I don't drink. I absolutely don't drink when I'm shooting. After whatever I'm done shooting, maybe I might have a drink, but more often than not, I don't drink at all. So I've learned, for example, that I can network. I can still hang out with a lot of these people, but not drink. I don't do the after parties. A lot of the festivals that I'm at, both here and abroad, there are lots of after parties that I don't do. I try to, sleep. I go to sleep immediately after the show. I go back. I send whatever images need to be sent out, and I just go back and I crash. So that's kind of something that that has stood me in good stead, I think. I found a way to network, to socialize, to build those connections without staying up late and drinking and just doing all of that stuff. So that's something that's, worked well for me.
After going through the challenges of shooting, and now you've really come into your own. I think you have shot wider variety of concerts than most Indian concert photographers, right? So you have seen the whole industry in India change over the last 6 or 7 years. Where do you see things going for concert photography in general in India, or concert photographers from India? How do you see them changing in the next few years? And where do you see yourself moving forward?
So I think, the live music industry itself, if you look at the live music industry in the last 6 years, it's really gone through the roof, right? So whether it's big festivals or whether it's shows, bands are doing more tours. There are Indian bands that are going abroad. So pre-COVID, the live music industry was really going places, really booming. People were actually making money, festivals and bands and all of that. So I think we will get back to that. It might take a year, it might take a year and a half. I think it's all vaccine dependent, essentially. I think we will get back to that. So there's definitely room, for for concert photography itself, right? It's definitely going to grow. Concert photographers themselves, I think, increasingly what I find, at least with the bands that I work for, they want me to do, for example, more video work. So I think that's how it will evolve, right? You can't, for a band, from a content perspective, they just don't want pictures. They want videos. They want ideas for Instagram reels or Instagram stories, whatever it is. So that is from a band's perspective, right? So they want like a BTS behind the scenes video, or they want a tour video and stuff like that. So I think photographers also, you can't essentially be a one trick pony, right? You need to be able to understand this at a slightly larger level. Festivals in India, people I've been talking to, at least this was at least last year, they don't want you to just give them a bunch of images, right? They want you to either put together a team and try to make all of the images and the content that you build fit into an overall strategy, right? And people are definitely, at least the festival organizers in India, they're definitely a lot more serious, and it's really evolved the way they work with photographers. I've had some great experiences working with some of the production companies in India. Extremely professional, really nice to work with, no problems with payments, all of that stuff. So I think it's really evolved from when I started to now. It's definitely evolved, right? Like I said, the live music scene. So in India, we've had U2 playing in India. We've had Katy Perry who came to India. A lot of the musicians I speak to want to come to India and play. So there's definitely opportunities, no doubt about it. Unfortunately now with this whole COVID scenario, we need to see how it goes. But I think it will come back, and it will come back in a big way. Yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt, because I think what this has shown, I mean, my own experience, in the West and even in India, people really want experiences, and not just like buy things, just not, material stuff. People want experiences. And I think these festivals have evolved. Artists have become like incredibly professional. They come out, they play a good show. A lot of the partying and the craziness is not how it's written about, right? Well, they're all very fit. They realize this makes them a lot of money. So the whole scene has evolved for sure.
So I've known you for quite a few years now, and I didn't know half the things that we talked about today, right? I didn't know about a lot of the hardships growing up, and then challenges of starting essentially a new branch to your career in your late 30s or your early 40s.
Absolutely.
What part of all the work that you have put in, how much of that is also down to luck?
I believe luck has played a huge part. You can get, you can delude yourself. Sometimes I feel thinking, you're actually extremely smart when you've been lucky. I've been very lucky. Like I said, the NH7 instance where that boy on the bus came up to me and, kind of told me who to write to, whether it was meeting Fabrizio backstage at Mahindra Blues in Bombay. And he and I just hit it off. We became friends. He's put me in touch with a ton of other people. He's a really big dude. He's a big producer. He's worked with some of the biggest names in the music business. And like I was, going back to that Paris story, I was outside this arena trying to shoot the Scorpions. And I had no luck anyway. I finally got to Gate 35 and met this elderly gentleman. He introduced himself. He said his name was Bertrand. And I introduced myself. And then we just got talking. And I showed him some of my work on my phone. He really liked what he saw. It turns out he runs one of the biggest music stock agencies in Europe, like Getty, but it's like the Getty for music. And he said, I'd love to sign you up. And we'd be happy to distribute your work. So again, and I signed up with them, and they distribute some of my work. Again, somebody I needn't have met at all, but complete, just got lucky. Again,
And I suppose that's
think that's
also
the
down to
opposite.
not knowing the language helped you get lucky to meet someone.
yeah, not knowing the language, floundering, just being there, and just this elderly gentleman coming up talking to me. Similar story. I was in France. I was going to, I was going to shoot Slash, and they put out a list at some of these festivals, right? So the record label and the PR team will put out a list of people who are approved to shoot. So even though I had what they call a priority pass and I had all the access, there's another level of access to shoot some of these bands. I was not on the first list. I was absolutely gutted, and I think he was going to go on stage at 9:30. It was 9:20, and I remember standing at the media tent, and I know the festival organizers, and they were like, "Look, we can't do anything. It's his label. We can't do anything." And I remember sitting and he gave me a name at the media tent. They said, "This is the lady in charge." And I remember looking through my LinkedIn, thinking, what if I find who this person is? Maybe I can DM her. Maybe she'd reply. So I had I had looked at her profile picture on LinkedIn. I was standing outside the media tent, and I sent off a note to her. And I looked up from my phone, and she was standing right there.
Right in front of you.
Absolutely in front of me.
Oh my God.
She was just coming out of the media tent, and I said, "Look, this is who I am, and I'd love to shoot Slash." And I quickly showed her some of my work, and she said, "Yeah, go." She said, "You can go," and she got me a pass, and she said, "Go and shoot." So I think I was one of 6 or 7 that got to shoot him. So yeah, like I said, luck has played a large part. Some of these have been big breaks, and some of these have been just for one show. But yeah, luck has played a huge part.
But I think it's also down to making your own, putting yourself in the right position at the right place at the right time.
Absolutely, I think that's one, and I think it's also a mindset thing, right? I remember thinking, as tired as I was, and I remember thinking, there's no way I'm going to leave this venue without shooting, Slash. And I shot him before in India, but I was thinking to myself, there's no way I'm going to go without shooting, and it worked. And I found that that's again something that's helped me a lot in tough situations. Just that mindset that you will make this happen no matter what has really helped.
Vikram, I think if I had to give a title to this episode, it would be called "Willing It to Happen," because that's the impression that I got from your whole story. So, and I think this is a story and incidents that will be useful and relatable to anyone who listens to it. So, thank you very much for being a part of the show and sharing some stories that I think can help people.
Thank you, Srinath. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope this helps people. Yeah, I really hope people can take something away from this.
Well, that's our show for this week. If you like this episode, please tell a friend about it and help get word out about this show. To watch this and other episodes of the show, please subscribe to Srinath Pictures on YouTube, or you can listen to the audio podcast by subscribing to Everything Comes Together on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or on the podcast app of your choice. The music for the show was composed by Ashray Harishankar from Escapist Music. Post-production by Thiruvikraman Srinivasaraghavan of SNS Arts Development Consultancy, and production assistance by Abdul Jilani. You can reach me on Instagram @Srinath or from my website www.srinathpictures.com. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another fascinating guests who work in photography, architecture or design. Until we meet again, it's goodbye from Mylapore.